Um, Good evening, or should I say good morning? The time is 25 to 5. I've been sitting here for some time now, actually. In this room, I have a party, which I quite enjoy, but one has one's reservations. One has quite enjoyed oneself, but one has to make reservations because the people weren't particularly interesting.
Now, this audio clip is special because nothing else shows Nick Drake talking. Now we're going to meet Tobias Wilden. He's a Nick Drake coverist, and because there are no videos of Nick Drake performing, I thought I'd choose him. In some ways he mirrors Drake, the long hair, shyness, yet extraordinary talent on guitar and vocals. So Nick Drake, is his death really a mystery? Nicholas Rodney Drake has become one of the most admired singers of the 20th century, even though he had a very small audience during his lifetime. In short, he was an English singer-songwriter who played guitar as he sang. He released 3 studio albums, which gradually received more recognition following his premature death. Let's turn back the clock, or calendar, to the 19th of June 1948, Rangoon in the country of Burma. I'm crap at geography too. Basically, it's in Southeast Asia and borders India, China and Thailand. Go back a few years, and his father, Rodney, had moved out there to work as an engineer for a plantation business. He was warm-hearted, sociable and very good at his job. At the same time, Mary, or Molly Lloyd, who like Nick was born in Rangoon, met Rodney. Young Molly was born in Rangoon as both of her parents were involved in the military. Molly and her 2 sisters were sent to England and brought up by their aunt and uncle. Later, they were sent to an independent girls' boarding school. Molly hated school, yet her intelligence meant she still passed on a school certificate examination, which got you into uni, but Molly didn't care. So instead she returned to Rangoon as a mature young lady. So yeah, that's when she met Rodney. She was 18 at the time, and 2 years later he proposed to her. She said yes, and a few years later, now married, they were starting to feel the effects of World War II. Molly and her younger sister Nancy trekked out to safety in India, and both husbands joined the army to fight the Japanese. The sisters took refuge with family and formed a duet, as they both liked music. Towards the end of the war, the Japanese still had a tight grip on Burma's resources and had cut off Allied India's supply of teak, a type of wood. So Rodney was seconded out of the army and commissioned to build a sawmill at the foot of the Himalaya mountains. This meant him and Molly could be reunited. Ever practical Rodney recycled the wooden packaging crates which held the prefabricated sawmill and used the wood to build a house for him and Molly. Nick's older sister, Gabrielle, was born here in 1944. After the war, the 3 travelled back to Rangoon. As I said earlier, he was born 19th of June 1948. Life was wonderful for colonials in Burma at the time, and the Drakes were a typical middle-class family. In 1952, when Nick was just 4, Rodney's boss offered him a job back in England. Rodney and Molly knew their children were getting older and would soon need an education back in England, so Rodney accepted. Rodney spared no expense on a house for Molly. The house, named Farley, sat in a small, idyllic village, Tanworth in Arden. The house was elegant yet comfortable, spacious, and looked out over the English countryside beyond. The sitting room was the hub of social events, often music-based, and was also a quiet place Molly could come to and write music, at the piano or desk. Molly recorded her songs in the 1950s using a basic setup at her home, a reel-to-reel tape recorder which she kept in the family drawing room. Molly was very beautiful and very creative, but without Rodney she would have been a troubled soul. After listening to Molly's music, I'm sure Nick's own work was highly influenced by his mother's. Nick and Gabrielle were sent to the schools their parents had attended themselves. The siblings went to their very earliest school together. So when did Nick's love of music begin? Well, he learned to play piano at a young age and soon began composing songs. Nick was captain in various games and other things, and at his next school became head boy of his first house. He was also accelerated a year. Drake played saxophone in the school orchestra and formed a band with 4 schoolmates. So I guess Nick's main hobbies were music and sport. He had friends and was confident, but still distinct in manner. His interest in music meant he began to neglect his studies. He attained fewer GCE O-levels than his teachers had been expecting. Weirdly, none of these things at school really meant much to Nick. His headmaster did mention, none of us seemed to know him very well. However, Molly and Rodney didn't mind that their children wanted to follow an unconventional career path, actress and musician, as they felt they were pursuing a destiny based on what they had always loved to do. At the age of 16-17, Nick purchased his first acoustic guitar for £13. At the dawn of adulthood, Nick enrolled at a tutorial college in Five Ways, Birmingham. He performed so well here that he won a scholarship to study English literature at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge University.
When I leapt into the car to drive home, after my merry abandon, I found the task extremely difficult, and it was extremely fortunate that there was nothing else on the road, because looking back on it, I seem to remember I had a mental brainstorm, well, I didn't realise at the time, and I think I drove the whole way home on the right-hand side of the road. This is something, of course, which comes from driving in France too much, which is what I've been doing recently, as you probably know.
He delayed attendance to Cambridge by 6 months by going to university in France. Here, he devotedly began to practice guitar and earn money by busking with friends in town. He often smoked cannabis with friends, and that spring he travelled with them to Morocco. Nick returned to England after his little adventure, and they saw uni as a 3-year holiday. It's obvious that Nick never really found it easy to be happy. Even when he was young, there was always something there, something wrong. Anyway, at this stage Nick was fairly happy. Nick lost his interest in sport and wasn't doing well at uni. Drake began performing in local clubs and coffee houses around London, and in February 1968, while playing support to a band at the Roundhouse in Camden Town, made an impression on English record producer Ashley Hutchings. This guy also wrote, played and produced music. Of course he fell in love with Drake's guitar skills, but also felt his image looked very much like a star. As he said, he looked wonderful and seemed to be 7 feet. So this guy, Hutchings, introduced Nick to the young American producer Joe Boyd, owner of production and management company Witch Season Productions. This company, at the time, was licensed to Island Records. Boyd and Drake formed an immediate bond, and the producer acted as a mentor to Drake throughout his career. Drake recorded a 4-track demo for Boyd to showcase his work on a reel-to-reel tape in his college room in the spring of 1968. Boyd loved it, and offered the 20-year-old a management, production and publishing contract, and that they should start work on a debut album. Drake accepted. He had also already decided not to complete his 3rd year at Cambridge. They began recording his debut album 5 Leaves Left later in 1968. Recording sessions took place in Sound Technique Studio, Chelsea, London, which doesn't exist anymore. Boyd wanted to keep Nick's music from sounding too poppy. Boyd found people from the London folk scene to provide backing. He also recruited a sound engineer and drafted in Richard Hewson to provide the string arrangements. Initial recordings didn't go very well, as they were irregular and rushed. Tension arose between Nick Drake and producer Joe Boyd as to the direction the album should take. Drake preferred a more organic sound, whereas Boyd wanted to use the studio as an instrument. However, co-workers of late Nick recount how he was usually great to work with. He would turn up on time, sing perfectly, play perfectly, and just be there. It was everyone else that you had to worry about. Drake and Boyd were unhappy with Hewson's contribution, so Drake suggested uni friend and music student Robert Kirby. Though Boyd was skeptical about taking on an amateur, he agreed to a trial. Post-production difficulties led to the release being delayed by several months. The album was likely poorly marketed, though the opening track, Time Has Told Me, was included on the Island Records sampler Nice Enough to Eat. This brought Drake a wider audience. Producer Joe Boyd thought he would just send Nick out on the road and that he would be a success. So Nick went on tour, playing at colleges and clubs, and it just didn't work out. Imagine you've got all these people drinking and talking over your music, completely disinterested. Well, I'm kind of sure it would annoy you.
One forgets so easily the lies, the truth and the pain. But still I'm wavering from the point. What I was trying to say is, when I sat here I had an extremely pleasant time on the piano actually. I was playing the piano and sort of singing.
Drake actually met a girl called Sophia Ride in London in 1968. Ride has been described by Drake's biographers as the nearest thing to a girlfriend in his life, but she now prefers the description best girlfriend. In a 2005 interview, Ride revealed that a week before Nick died, she had sought to end their relationship. She couldn't cope with it. Prior to this, Nick had a relationship with then session singer Linda Thompson. In a recent interview, she recalls he was a detached character, but lovely too, and absolutely ravishing. In autumn 1969, Drake moved to London to concentrate on his music career, so he only ended up getting a third on his degree. But I guess he didn't really want to go to uni in the first place. Producer Boyd kindly paid for a ground floor bedsit in Belsize Park, Camden, in an effort to bring stability back to Drake's life. Nick did a few other things, including some live concerts, but they didn't go very well, further spurring his dislike towards performing. In 1971, they began work on Nick's second album, Brighter Later, which was again produced by Joe Boyd and engineered by John Wood. This album featured a more upbeat and jazzier sound. This decision came after the poor commercial success of the first album. It is suspected Drake was using heroin during this period. Though Drake was confident this album would be a commercial success, it sold fewer than 3,000 copies. Soon after the release, Joe Boyd actually sold Witch Season Productions to Island Records. The loss of his key mentor, coupled with the album's poor sales, led Drake to further retreat into depression. He no longer liked London, and was unhappy living alone, and clearly nervous and uncomfortable performing at a series of concerts in early 1970. In June 1970, Drake gave one of his final live appearances at Ewell College, Surrey. Here, he walked off stage halfway through Fruit Tree. Island Records was still keen to promote his second album through press interviews, radio sessions and live appearances, but by now Drake was smoking unbelievable amounts of cannabis and exhibiting the first signs of psychosis, so he refused the offer and isolated himself in his London flat, rarely leaving and then only to play an occasional concert or to buy drugs. Even though Island Records weren't interested in the third album, Drake approached sound engineer John Wood and began work on it with him anyway. Recording sessions took place over just 2 nights, with just the two of them, and in these sessions Nick was in such a state that he couldn't sing and play the guitar at the same time, something which he had always done with great ease. The last 4 tracks, including Black Eyed Dog, are recorded with the guitar and then the voice singing over the guitar. The songs are generally a lot shorter on this album, as Nick felt in Brighter Later, the second album, the songs sounded too full and too elaborate. Many think this third album is more like Nick than the other two. It sold fewer copies than either of its predecessors. After the failure of his third and final album, Drake was disheartened and convinced he would be unable to write again, so he decided to retire from music. He withdrew completely from both live performance and recording, retreating to his parents' home in Warwickshire. A concerned friend of Nick's went to his house and hammered on the door. There was no reply, so he went around to the back of the house and looked through the window and saw Nick just staring at the wall. Nick's parents tried so hard to understand, but it was very difficult to do so. They felt that everything they did as parents was wrong. It was strange, Nick had retreated into his home environment, but he so wanted to break away from it. On the night of his death, November the 25th, 1974, 26-year-old Nicholas Rodney Drake went up to bed early, and his mother saw him standing by his bedroom door. She said, "You off to bed, Nick?" Often he'd go downstairs during the night, when he couldn't sleep. Gabrielle, Nick's sister, would usually hear him passing their parents' bedroom door and go down to talk to him. On this occasion she did not hear him.
I might have kept people awake upstairs, one hopes not, but it was pleasant, and it's extremely pleasant sitting here now because I think there's something extraordinarily nice about seeing the dawn up before one goes to bed, because there's something uncanny about it when it suddenly becomes light, because one connects darkness with getting to bed, surely, and when one is still up when it becomes light, and it's a new day and you still haven't gone to bed to sleep, because the night equals sleep so easily, and when one is still up when the new day begins, it is something of an intriguing experience I always find.
Nick went back upstairs, took an extra strong dose of antidepressant pills, and a while after the glowing sun had risen, at about 12 o'clock, his mother found him lying still across the bed. The first thing she saw was his long, long legs. There was no suicide note, only a letter addressed to Sophia Ride. Neither of Nick's parents lived to see his later fame. Molly died aged 77 on June the 4th, 1993. Her ashes were buried in the same spot as those of her husband and her son. In 2015, I visited Tamworth in Arden. I spoke to a man who, with his wife, organises the annual Nick Drake gathering, which now brings hundreds of people a year. Here, he speaks about a plaque which was erected by the Drake's gravestone, and then about the organ stop Nick's parents donated to the local church in memory of their son.
We were having problems with well-meaning fans of Nick being over-enthusiastic about what they placed on the grave. She asked if we could put something, a sign, and so that it blended with the churchyard. I think because of his interest, my son was asked whether he'd like to have a go at producing the sign. There's a plaque on the organ cover there in memory of Nick Drake. The Sesquialtera stop was given in memory of Nick Drake and his music by his family in 1977. That's how the family wished him to be remembered.
The church guest book is filled with warm messages from Nick Drake's fans. The legacy of music Drake left behind will continue to be part of the lives of many.
Anyway, I think I'm straying from the point, and I shall probably stop talking here because if I don't, I shall start sort of relating sort of life histories and things which will be very tedious. So here I'll also say goodnight. Good night.
So, the question I set out to answer at the beginning of this documentary was, Nick Drake, was his death a mystery? I hope I've answered that question for you by telling you the story of his life, and that's allowed you to form your own opinion of his death.
Robinsons, Serving History.